All right, so what would you do with this window? You know, I thought before we started looking at some of the different options and things that are out there, I wanted to talk a bit about what is a great window treatment, what makes a good window treatment. You know, not only does it need to look good, but it needs to be beautifully made, and I think as designers that's where we come in, making sure that we're using the artisan workrooms that are available to us and that we're aware of what those workroom standards are. Are they, you know, 5-inch double hems instead of 4? Are they hand sewing on rings? What, you know, are they lining and interlining? And then it's also about you building your own signature style. So when you're selling window treatments, you know, you're selling your style, or if you will, to the client. So what are those things that you do that are maybe your benchmark or your gold standard that not every other designer in your area does? It's certainly about transcending, you know, the test of time, standing the test of time, and there's a bit about, you know, integrity of the concept and the function and the style. One of the questions I get at least a half a dozen times a week is about fabrics and fabric choices, and interestingly enough, a lot of designers are not making appropriate fabric choices for the style, and you know, it looks great in the picture and they know what they want it to do, and then they fall in love with the fabric and that fabric's not going to do it. So again, build that skill set about what textiles are, what are the fiber contents, what are finishes, how are all of those things going to affect what choice you make when you're putting together great window treatments. And then of course it's, you know, basically 98% common sense, but what really makes it fascinating, I think, is that other 2%, that magic ingredient. Certainly window treatments are the most profitable niche within your design business, and they're also the most aggravating at sometimes and technical, as I think we would all attest to, correct? So it's really more than good design. It's about also respecting the character of the room, working in the character of the room, something that's crazy over the top unless that's exactly what the client wanted, and she wanted to be very dramatic at the windows. In a suburban tract home with 8-foot ceilings just might not be what we would all think of as a good design. Maybe what I should say is there might be a better design out there. And then also it's about telling a story through your details, your crafting of the treatment through the right materials, and that you're, you know, seamlessly incorporating that modern function and convenience that we all want for our window treatments. And certainly with motorization coming to the forefront with child safety. But the simple fact is that just all windows are just not alike. You have to break the rules sometimes. Good design has loads and loads of rules, particularly when it comes to window treatments, but Dorothy Draper always said, once you know the rules, you'll know when you can run the red light. Just remember, if you're going to break the rule, it has to have much more impact than just doing one little detail. This happens to be an Eric Coulter room. Love the lapis walls, right? And then the chinoiserie, I believe that's a Schumacher pattern, but don't you love the banding and the pagoda shape on the cornice, and then this wonderful tassel, ombre tassel that hangs down. I think that's a Samuel and Sons tassel also. One of the things that I most often get asked about is issues with mounting systems. And what it really comes down to, no matter what window you're doing, is you have to know how heavy your treatment's going to be, and you have to know how to figure drapery weights, and you have to also know what your specifications on your hardware or your mounting system is per linear foot. Will that rod hold the weight of that drapery? So for example, there's 2-story drapery panels that look like they're, you know, 2 widths, maybe 2.5 widths. If they were lined and interlined, is that rod that you're using to hold it up, is it going to, you know, work? Now granted, the substrate that you're going into, whether it's drywall or plaster or, you know, hopefully a stud, is, you know, contingent on the weight, obviously, but you certainly don't want this happening because you bought a rod, or you to be very honest, you cheaped out on the decorative hardware to stay within the client's budget. So let's talk a little bit about drapery weights before we move into some of the specialty looks and some design options. As I said, thank goodness for a good installer. This was in one of my drapery Facebook groups, and the rod was not, mounting system was not correct for the weight of the drapery, and he had to use Z brackets to hold it up so that it wouldn't come out of the wall. Thank goodness it was covered by the return, but again, he MacGyvered it on the job site. So you need to know what those weight limits are of each track that you're being used. I'm just going to give you an example, and I'm not throwing anybody under the bus, but if you know the Kirsch Metal Trends, they do a smooth pole and they do a fluted pole. If you look in the Kirsch book, you'll see that it says that the smooth pole holds 9/10 pounds per foot and a fluted pole holds 1.5 pounds. Fluted poles always have more surface, so there's always more rigidity and more strength to it. So that means if I'm doing an 8-foot wide functioning drapery, 96 bracket to bracket, let's say on a sliding glass door or on a double window, it can't weigh any more than 7.2 pounds lined and face fabric, or 12 pounds if I choose the fluted pole. If you choose, you know, to line and interline it and a multi-purpose or a heavyweight upholstery fabric or, you know, lengths, then, you know, you could very easily go over this 7.2 pounds. So to give you an example, here's the smooth rod, right? We know it holds 9/10 pounds. If I have a 96-inch bracket to bracket, that's typically 5 widths of draperies if I'm using 2.5 times fullness, and maybe 3 yards if I'm at, you know, 90 inches on a finished length, somewhere around that. That's 15 yards of fabric. You figure your fabric weights by yardage and how many yards you're ordering. So I'm ordering 15 yards of fabric lined. That's 1 pound per yard, and that means that the drapery's weighing 15 pounds. The fluted rod maximum is only 12 pounds. If I chose the smooth rod, it was 7.2 pounds. That's that's over double in weight of what that rod will hold. It's going to pull out of the wall, or it's going to mark, or you're going to need to do extra supports. Can you do extra supports, or is she wanting this to function as a hand draw? All of those things need to come into play. So one of the first things, no matter what you're doing when you're designing, is understanding how to figure drapery weights. And as I said, it's typically taking your total yardage and multiplying it by one of the following, depending on how you're speccing the job. If you're using a multi-purpose drapery fabric where your jobber has said this is for drapery use and you're lining it only, it's between 3/4 pound to a pound. I usually typically like to figure a pound. If you're doing drapery fabric plus blackout, it's 1 pound to 1.5 pounds. If you're doing regular drapery plus lining plus inner lining, again, depending on what weight inner lining you're using, if you're using, for example, heavyweight flannel, that's going to weigh more than a typical Rocklon standard inner lining is. But that's between 1.5 and 1.75 pounds per yard. So once you figure your yardages, you can very easily multiply out, and then what you're going to want to do is go to your hardware book. Most often it's in your price list based on whoever you're ordering your drapery hardware from, and they will tell you how much that rod weight will carry per linear foot. So if you know you're ordering a rod that's going to be a bracket to bracket of 60 inches, 5 foot, it's going to tell you per linear foot, take it times 5, and then you're going to compare the two. Do the draperies weigh more than what this rod will hold? That's going to determine, again, whether you're going to go for your drapery rod or if you're going to do more supports. Again, this is a custom job, and doing things like this for your client, and hopefully not, you know, I know they're always a price conscious. client. We all have them, and they're always, you know, hardware sometimes is the last thing to figure, and a lot of times they're saying, what, it's costing me X amount, you know, I need 50 rings and poles and finials, and it's $1,000 for drapery hardware. Yes, but you know, you got to hold those draperies up onto the wall, those custom draperies that we're fabricating. So I wanted to make everybody aware of that. The other issue that I get at least 5 to 6 times a week is flaring of drapery fabric. And particularly, this happens to be a customer that sent me a picture and said, how come I can't get really nice, straight, ripple folds, waves like I have up here, down here at the bottom? Everything's flaring. And basically, part of the issue here in this particular job was it's 100% polyester fabric, and she put Apollo lining behind it. And polyesters repel each other, and they pull apart. And a polyester, when a fold gets close to it, the next fold, it will flare. There are certain things that you have to almost always do when you're selling polyester fabrics to try to control flaring. One of them in this particular instance is that the style choice is a ripple fold. I get that it's a very popular style choice these days for particularly your younger client. But remember, what's a ripple fold? It's nothing more than a flat piece of fabric with a tape sewn on the top of it. How you create a fold is twofold. 1, through fullness, and 2, through a stitched or structured pleat at the top of a drapery panel that starts the fold and starts the fold coming down. So if I don't have that happening, like in a ripple fold, I'm always going to get this. And if she says to you, well, but look at this picture in, you know, whatever, pick a catalog, pick a brochure, whatever it might be, if she says to you, how come it's not flaring here, remind her that that was probably photo styled, and it's glued, screwed, stapled. God only knows what they did before they shot that picture. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work in her home. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of the other options when I show you some ripple fold. But I think as a standard, when you're doing draperies and you're using polyester fabrics and polyester linings, and you then as a just as a standard, you want to do what sometimes is called flagging a hem, stay pleat. Lafayette calls it stay pleat. A memory stitch. Rolly has a no-sew system, which is beaded chain, but essentially it's tacked, and it's a crochet weight or an upholstery thread weight, and it's tacked at the back side of each pole. And this is typically I don't know, somewhere in the 4.5 to 6 inch range. It all kind of depends on what fabric you're using, etc. By the way, it is not a running stitch. I just was in a client's home where I am redoing all of the memory stitches that another designer did on the job, because it was actually a running stitch. And they, by the way, in some cases only did a running stitch part of the way through. But these are tacked. This is actually sewn in tack. If you do a running stitch, these things are going to pull apart anyway and flare. So let's talk a bit about what makes certain window treatments work and what you might do based on some of the windows that you're working with. Now, the typical one that we're all, you know, the rectangular double hung sash windows in the Northeast and the Midwest, very popular. It's probably the easiest to treat. Most styles will work on it. Most of the time we're doing combinations, meaning we might be mixing hard and soft. You want to pay attention to scale and proportion, and you want to also pay attention to where the windows are placed in the room and the furnishings as a great place to start. Most of the windows that we're dealing with in today's homes seem to be these tall windows. So you have lots of opportunity to dress them, but you want to be careful and not overdress them. Yes, you want to put fullness to the treatment, but you want to hide the fullness actually in the pleat. You want it to be a little bit more restrained. You want it to, I sort of call it, I have a term where I'll say it, you know, it looks like it's been on the window for a while, or it's old money versus new money, if you will. You need to carry the math when you're working out your specs into the treatment. Also, when you're working in taller ceilings, just as a rule of thumb, there's nobody has said that 4-inch pleated headings are the standard. You know, whether if you're working in the rules of good proportion and you're doing anything over 86 to 90 inches high on a finished length on your drapery panel, your drapery heading depth should be somewhere in the 6-inch range. So make sure that your proportions are working when you're working in tall windows. When you do an attached valance, by the way, if you came in here and did some sort of attached valance, what'll happen is if you have a really tall, skinny window, it will tend to make that look wider. So part of our job, a major part of our job, is all about camouflaging windows, right? And because they're set in the elevation incorrectly, you know, they're not centered on the wall, it's odd, you know, it's an odd size, it's not in proportion with what's happening in the room. So we're trying to make, you know, narrow windows wider, wider windows narrower. That's, you know, we're doing that on a daily basis. Also, when you're working in a room that's large with tall windows, think about adding volume and filling the space in the room. Here, they did eyebrow Italian strong draperies with goblet pleats. These are regular, you know, rectangular windows. They're not eyebrows or arches. But not only did they come up above the window to do the arch, but the board that it's mounted on comes out into the room. So it's shaped very similar to a corona, if you will. So fill that space in the room, come out, give dimension. That's one of the things we're seeing a lot more layering, as you're probably seeing your clients are starting to ask for layers of sheers versus over draperies and things, which is exciting. Maybe that means we'll actually start doing valances, and who knows, we might even get back into swags and cascades before you know it. So think about adding volume and space to the room. How you can do this on boards is Firmaflex. I would get a piece of Firmaflex from Rolly. If you haven't ever played around with it, it's awesome stuff. You can bend it, you can shape it, you can staple into it, glue into it, screw into it. So it has all the properties of wood, but it's flexible. And then also remember to follow the architecture of the window. What I love about these bandings is that they actually follow the, you know, muttons and the mullions and the breaks in the window and then the chair rail. So it breaks everything up and it kind of does color blocking, if you will. Shades are going to offer you some light, and they're also going to show off the architecture of the window, particularly if you inside mount and you've got pediments or rosettes in the corners, or, you know, traditional heavy woodwork. And it also, when you're talking about shades, it's about doing a really awesome dynamic print. So the scale is beautiful on this. Look at these tall windows with these pots in the blue and white. It really sets those windows off. And it's all the fabric choice, because it's a very simple London Relax shade, right? So it really makes a statement, I think. But when you're doing shades, Roman shades, another category that's really growing along with roller shades, is remember to watch out for cratering. Make sure that your workroom is going to put stabilizer bars in your treatment so that you don't get this and don't get those light gaps, especially in bedrooms, right? Shaped hems tend to soften the architecture, so think about distinctive valances, because you can create some rhythm and define the line. You can also add a bit of more importance if you're doing tassels or trim or banding or tapes. Horizontal stripes are great for tall windows. Here you've got flat panels that have been added onto the wall, and pleated Romans will do the same. Here we're using two fabrics to add contrast. Again, you know, maybe she can't make her mind up about the fabrics, or you want to, you know, again, put more drama to the window, but do it sort of subtly and simply. So, you know, a toile always, in a geometric stripe or check, always works with a pattern, a floral or a toile. So consider just adding, you know, these are, looks like these are half widths. There's only two, so you've got 2 more cuts. She needed those cuts anyway, so she actually maybe saved some money and worked in the budget too, because the 12 maybe is probably more expensive than that stripe is. Emphasize your height if that's what you're trying to do, is make everything feel taller. Obviously, height reigns supreme. It's up here at the ceiling, but look at, by tying it down low, you'll also add height. And I love, these are called, I call these peekaboo curtains. So what you've got is, you know, the tied back curtain, and then you have this check, this kind of peekabooing out from underneath. Very simple, flat valance with double horns on it. And the cord is hiding probably where it's been attached or sewn. If I did anything differently, I might put a leg on this pelmet so that I could get a crisper line here. It's kind of soft and rounded, and maybe that's fine. But again, that's up to your design intent. But I always use a concealed tie-back holder. This is a really pretty treatment, probably velvet with some sort of carved cornice board. But look at how everything craters in, and they just basically tack that tie-back right onto the trim. The other thing is you probably maybe would have wanted this treatment a little wider so that you have room for the concealed tie-back, and you can wrap around, and because here, even at the top, you're seeing trim at the return. Something I learned early on from one of the designers that I do a lot of work for is when they're doing combination treatments and putting shades or wood blinds or what have you, Roman shades even, in fabric shades, they always bring everything to the floor, including the hard treatment. Not only is it a cha-ching factor because you sell the products longer, right? So some more money. But again, here's the wood blind. It's all the way down to the floor. How great is that? It would have, unless it had stopped here, maybe at the sill, you would have had all this wood or whatever. So again, it emphasizes, it's a camouflage technique, and it would help disguise that low ceiling. Dining rooms are a great place to make a statement with tall windows because they tend to have less furnishings. It's also a place where a conversation starter, you're not in it very often, you're only entertaining. So here is a inverted box pleat, Italian strung drapery treatment. When you tie it, we talked about emphasizing height by tying low. Here, by tying high, it makes the window feel wider. This, I'll show you how this is done in a minute, but this is one version. This is the more formal version of it. Here's the second version of this, and basically, you know, interesting header, and how that header is done is it's an inverted it's a box pleat, and the pleats are set about 3/4 of an inch apart. There's a fascia on the board, and then you're just folding this up and tacking these in with nail heads, and you're getting that look, which is really, really wonderful, or that look if you didn't do a faced heading and a cord to the top. Here, tall window with a pediment, right? Which a couple of things here that I think are interesting. File this into your little journal. So I've got a little shaped pelmet here, and it hides the fact that there's a roller shade behind it, so you aren't seeing the roller. And it's a little checked. You can see it over here, and it's a fun little shape. It's just probably got buckram in it or Pellon, a fusible Pellon on it, and it's, you know, you could just Velcro it right up. But notice that this treatment, both shears and the pleated over drapery, are mounted right onto the molding above that window. It probably was hung by Kerflex. You can't buy Kerflex anymore, but what you can get from Raleigh to do that kind of look is sort of that, you know, floating drapery panel or pleated panel, which seems to be very popular actually right now, is from Raleigh. You can order their right-angled tack strip. Remember that dramatic valances always add importance to the window. Now this is a bit over the top, but again, you know, unless the customer is all about tailoring and simplifying, you know, let's put some drama on the windows, right? What would you do with arch windows? I think the first thing is does it have to be covered? Do you need light control and privacy? Is that room formal or casual? because there's a lot of different variations, whether it's a Palladian or a Gothic arch, which comes to a point, or, you know, side windows in a Palladian with all this marvelous architecture around it, around the window. You know, you probably don't want to hide that, right? A couple of things that you might not be aware of, installers are using them all the time. The Palladian shelf, you can get it from Lafayette. You can also get it from Graber now, or from the Ultimate Install, the floating header. So when you're doing Palladian windows and you've got, you know, 100 inches wide and there's no center piece between the arch and the top of the rectangle, you need some sort of you know, support bar there to hang your treatments, whether it's hard treatments, soft treatments, whatever it might be. These two things are godsend. Here's the Firmaflex. This is an arch cornice that's been created with Firmaflex. Also, here's the right angle tack strip from Rolly, but in this case it's notched, so you can put it inside of an arch or eyebrow, if you will. So remember, with arch windows, you want to flatter the architecture, you want to mimic that curve. Most top treatments can be made into arched and adjusted for arch windows. So if you're looking at pictures and it's a rectangular window, any good workroom can help you adjust that for an arch. But remember, stationary draperies are the best. Why is that? Because the leading edge is always longer than the return edge, right? Cascades, I think on arches personally always look best when they're placed under swags because it adds more width. It also follows that, mimics that curve of the window. So if you're really wanting to play down the curves, then that's when you're just going to do the rod and stationary panels, right? Yeah, it's okay. But what about using tableau up in that arch and then hanging a drapery from it and doing an interesting header? Or here using medallions. There's some great medallions on the market, and I love the fact that it's not just a pole swag drape like we used to do in the 90s, but and that it has a taper with a lining, but notice that it's all scalloped on the leading edge. It just really softens and again talks about mimicking that curve. This is a great treatment because here you've got that wonderful Palladian window with two side windows that open out, right? You could have done a rod, two short rods, and you could have done a pair of panels. I like that they did the plates here from the transferware from the customer's collection because it adds visual weight in the center instead of doing 4 panels. I think this is a great arched stationary valance, inverted box pleat, shape at the bottom, fits right into the inside mount. It's just clean, it's wonderful. It could be traditional, it could be transitional, it could be contemporary. Remember that arched hems on valances and cornices can help accent height and curve. They can also hide blinds. So what you can do is mount a rectangular blind under here. You can motorize it for that matter, and one blind or have a pull cord, one blind mounted here can come down and cover the whole window rather than having to have something stationary or even, you know, from blind curves and corners or wherever in moving an arch. And then it just, you know, it's a pain because you've got to be in and out with it. Sunbursts aren't necessarily in style. Here's another example of that where we did this valance and then actually the duets are up here underneath in the stack and they come down for light and sun control. They cover the whole window, but we're still honoring the architecture of the arch. Balloons are a great choice for arches. Here, this is actually a functioning balloon that only goes up part of the way. Otherwise, you have issues. But what I like about it is it's an inverted box pleat. You have contrast insert, and then there's a button here and here and here. So they've buttoned these, and then you get this sort of peekaboo again, and they come up and down, and they really only raise them up to that. Again, something you're going to talk to your client about so she's aware she's not pulling it all the way up and having to dress it. Balloons you have to dress anyway, right? Pleated draperies on arches, remember, are always longer on the center, but this is really nice. This is mounted on a covered board. This is LaFair Forge iron, and any of your Helzer Brothers, LaFair Forge, or Ryan, you send them a template. They'll bend the rod for you, and then you also have to tell them how many rings and how far apart you want your spacing on the rings. So then you're going to need to know how far or how wide you want that stack on a stationary panel, and they will weld these rings on for you. Otherwise, they would have just all fallen down onto the finial. But isn't that a great look? This is one of my faves too. This is in my sort of client dream journal. Stationary Europleat panels, rod all the way across. Maybe would have raised it up a little bit. It's kind of just, and I don't know if this is just the way it's been shot in photography, but it looks like the rod's kind of like cutting off the top of the arch, right? But then I've got pole swags, got one, so it almost looks like a panel swag or a necklace swag, and then I have a second one and a small jabot. So it brings your eye in and it emphasizes the arch, but I don't have all those medallions and that drapery and that swooping up, if you will. Again, I put in a couple of what not to do's. This is a great room, upholstered walls, stationary panels with panel swags, but unfortunately, I think it would have been a better look if you had done short rods, or maybe floated these panels, or done some sort of keystone, or done a straight rod bent to the arch, straight rod bent to the arch, straight rod. Again, depending on the client's budget, but breaking and then actually putting the support here to hold the rod is a no-no. This is Paul Penier, I think. I love the sheer Roman, so you get this really sort of ethereal look, and you see the wonderful architecture through the gauziness of the sheer. This is beautiful too. So I have a lifted swag, which also emphasizes. And then this is actually Kips Bay from last year. So, we're sort of in that mode. Hopefully we're coming out where it's, let's do a decorative rod and stationary drapery panels. Oh, let's put a tape on the leading edge to really make it special. I think what they did here was one more step, which I really like. So yes, he did the stationary panels and he did the rods and he did the double banding, right? There's a tiny black grosgrain on the edge of the drapery panel. But this is just a scrim panel. It's actually mounted on a 1x2 behind the rod. Okay, you could probably even tack it if you're using a wood rod to the rod. The scrim itself also has the black banding down it, and then it's just got a rod pocket in the bottom, and it hangs free. So we haven't really accepted sliding track panels in the hard treatments as much as the Europeans have, but I'm really liking this sort of flat panel, and probably kind of goes to the fact that we're loving Roman shades as a category, but these sort of scrim panels that, again, you see what's happening behind it. It's real simple, it's real clean, there's not a lot of fullness and tchotchke stuff happening. I think this is a really interesting look. Speaking of tchotchke, then it's over the top. You've got curved cornices in some places. It works. Eyebrows, which are, obviously what works for eyebrow arches works for eyebrows. You also always have to have some sort of template and think about all the Firmaflex and everything. But I love this because typically we'd think of doing an eyebrow cornice and we'd put panels behind it. Here, there's two of them. That's why they're tied back panels on one side. Love the little detail of the bias cut tie back, bow tie back, and the bias cut fringe and banding on here. But here, it's mounted on the top of the cornice for a different look. Just by switching them up can be really different. This is, you could do this with tableau. There's sheer behind it, rod pocket, flexible rod, and then this is a tableau or a wrought iron piece, and as a lambrequin. Here again, medallions on this eyebrow, but then a flat pelmet that's actually been, it's lined and interlined, so it's heavy. I would also, if you really want it to have even a stiffer look, maybe you upholster it lightly. There's a lot of different ways you could do that look. Speaking of eyebrows, I always like to show this picture because, and we talked about hiding blinds under arches. Arches, eyebrows, same sort of thing. So here what you're seeing is they're mounting the rectangular, this happens to be a top-down, bottom-up shade underneath, over a tub, by the way. Oops, what happened to the picture? And there is the finish treatment. So you did the shaped hemline and cornice, and it hides the fact that there's a horizontal blind underneath there. Arch valances, look at this. Arched window with side panels, so they did shutters on either side of the bed for privacy, and then they did this shaped, arched, it's got a piece of, this is actually trim up here, meaning trim like passementerie trim, or this arch. And you know what, you can also do these shapes whether you have an arch window or not to really define it. I love this little in a box pleated ruffle that's at the top. What about bay windows? Well, if you don't have this in your toolbox, you definitely need one. This is the dustboard protractor. You can put it up and it'll tell you what your angles are, and then it also will tell you based on your projection what you have to deduct off of your board face width, what you have to cut off of them so that you don't have to do miters. And if you flip this protractor, it will allow you to canter your window treatments that are board mounting, and it will get you that measurement. And what a cantering is basically cutting off the board so that it does not jut past the interior plane of a bay window. You're looking at this bay window on the top side, so you literally cut this off. I will tell you that if you're working in, you know, standard boards like 1x4, 1x6, 1x8, this measurement is typically about an inch larger than what a 1x6 would be. So if you were ordering a 6-inch return for a 1x6, if you order a 7-inch because you didn't get that measurement from your installer, a 7-inch return, you should be fine. And even if you have a little left, you can always wrap it back to the back. We always wrap back anyway. But this is what a cantered would look like. And also keeping in mind when you're doing medallions in bays, do you know how to solve this issue? Can you see what's happening here? Decided to do medallions and then went, oops, I've got a flat round piece here for my medallion. That won't fit in the corner, so I can't mount it in the corner, right? Better look would have been to have that medallion here in the corner and here in the corner. What you're going to do is take a 2x4 and you're going to cut a 45-degree angle off of the edge of it, and you'll get a triangle, right? And that little triangle will fit in here and it will give you a flat surface to mount that medallion. Now keep in mind, the projection of these corner medallions will be less than what that projection is when they're mounted directly into the wall. When you're working with bay windows, typically you have two design choices. You can treat one separately, or you can treat it all three as one. You know, here's one. Here's when you're treating them separately. When you're doing it, though, you want to remember to unify the space, whether you use jabots, panels, cascades, whatever it is. Because typically you have wall, and I don't know how it is for the rest of you across the United States, but typically in the Midwest, this wall space is not necessarily the same size. So you want to, you know, bring that across and unify all of that. Another thing to think about is finial adapters. This happens to be a bow, but this also works for bay windows. Is a finial adapter allows you to bend the finial so you see the profile. Because isn't that what we're selling the client? When you buy a finial, you want, the beauty of the finial is looking at the profile of the finial, not straight on, right? And if she's spending $100 for a finial, if you can do a finial adapter to bend it back so she can see the prettiness of it, you basically bend it back into the interior wall. How about this? This is great, you know, unifying the design through the top treatment on the bay. Here's, speaking of scrim panels, here's a bay window, and what this is giving you this privacy scrim. So it's basically a 1x2 frame, 4-sided frame that's pressure fit inside the jambs, and it's velcroed, and maybe painted or covered in fabric, and then this is just a scrim that has Velcro sewn on all four edges, and it's, you know, put taut in the window. So, oops, sorry. I think that's a great solution rather than having to have a blind, right? Or screens. Or, you know, maybe turning your treatment into, you know, your bay window into this banquette if it's a dining room, right? And then these grommet panels, though I got to tell you, I wish that the panel came down here to the cushion. Not necessarily my fave length on this. But you know, I know a lot of you are getting asked about grommets. The customers always are wanting to do grommets. Here are a couple of rules of thumb for grommets. You typically have 6 to 8 grommets per width, but that's based on your design and your grommet size. Remember that your grommets are placed down, so your rod typically is 1 inch down from the top of the panel, so you have to adjust your finished length for that. Even number of grommets always create a pleat section between the grommet, and they also give you a return back to the wall. Consider putting buckram in your headings because it'll help shape it better, and it will also, you know, if you're doing a functioning grommet, which I know that they all ask for, which, you know, keep in mind, grommets are not designed to function. They will require fussing. Tell her that. Have her sign off on that, but buckram sometimes can be helpful. So if you need to do a functional treatment, here's the formula. Your grommet, inside diameter of your grommet needs to be at least 40% larger than the diameter of your pole. So the inside diameter of your grommet needs to be 40% larger than your pole diameter. You also might want to consider grommet links for consistent spacing or a grommet header tape. I always use 2 to 2.5 1 fullness. Again, everybody tries to skimp and get in there in 1.5 or 1.25. It's not going to look right. Remember that if you're using a number 12 grommet, figure 6 to 8 up per width. If you're using any of the larger ones, you want to be at about 6 per width. Bays can appear at odds sometimes in the room, so use that proportion to rectify it. Maybe you treat it as a stage set. Here's an interesting swag and cascade with doors, for example. Or you can mix treatments. Here's an over drapery on the outside and the interior wall, and then in the bay is a ripple fold. Or I love these. What about mirrored cornices? I don't know if anybody's done mirrored cornices, but work with your mirror guy or your glass guy. You will be surprised. The price of some of the smoky mirror is obviously more, but when you're working with mirrored cornices, they can be a really nice budget-friendly glam look for you. Or when you're doing bays and maybe shears within that bay. I love this little trick. Sometimes it's a budget trick. So, you know, not all of us like to see the buckram when you're doing a pleated shear. So what they did here is they used the satin heading, which matches the outer satin that's on the drapery panel, right? This also works as if you're using a pattern shear and you're going to be double turning it and you're going to get that pattern under pattern. You can, on the hem or on the header, you might consider facing it. Bow windows. Again, it's about emphasizing the shape and doing, you know, whether it's repeating panels, or in this case, this was a bow window. There was this 12-inch space and then there was a glass ceiling over it. And that's, notice we also actually bent the finials so that we could see the finials on the side through a finial adapter. Here's that pattern again on a bow, but again, it's just a simple shade, but it really shows off. It's the fabric that makes it. Or this is a Barclay Butera. What he does really interestingly here for this bow window is there are 2 mirrors on the side, so it extends that and makes that whole treatment seem larger and come into the room and fill the volume of the room. You know, consider shears to create that one look, and as I mentioned here, you've got that ripple fold again. Corner windows. becoming more and more popular because you get more view for less money than putting in transoms and arches, etc. So builders are starting to do corner windows for panoramic views. The problem with corner windows, I'm going to go back here, is that the point of emphasis is right here, and there's always a gap traditionally. So you got to, it's difficult to balance the treatment. You have to do measurements to make sure that you know, whether you're doing a butt or a bypass, you're going to have to take some deductions, and you're going to want to try to eliminate any gapping so that it looks odd when you look at it. Talk about, you know, when you're doing corner windows, bay windows, any of those kinds of things, please use the specialty hardware applications that you can get from your, you know, it costs a little bit more money, but every drapery hardware company is doing a flexible elbow or a mitered, you know, will do a mitered corner for you, what have you, versus, you know, kind of butt and bypassing. There's a lot going on in here. And look at, here's your last ring, and here's your last ring. I've got a gap of a couple of inches. So I'm going to see all of this because here's my return edge is going to go back to that, to the wall, right? So I'm going to see all this in here. If I had done some sort of flexible corner where I could have brought two rings together or brought a space here, I would have covered that. That's the other thing, is you want to order one panel for that, not necessarily two, because you want to eliminate that gap like that. That's all one, that's one valance so that you don't have those gaps. Interesting, look with upholstered rods here, or what, you know, let's just do short rods. There's no rule that says you have to come all the way across into the box window. Or maybe you're extending crown so that you can make these function and intricate into the architecture of the room, like these corner windows. Picture windows, big windows. You know, one large shade or cornice needs to be broken up into the details. You need, you know, a treatment that opens up during the day but controls that, what I call that black hole during night. This is an interesting take on a large window, which is basically the windows in a box, and it goes wall to wall essentially. So what you're looking at is two tracks. There's a straight track that's holding the sheer ripple fold, and then the over track was bent out and around that column. And what happens is here you can see with the or the over drapery, which was also a ripple fold, is on that track, and it comes over and it kind of creates this sort of fabric column on either side. So here's what it looks like. So I've got, you know, the shears on my big window, wall to wall, and then they did a custom bend. Both of these rods function, and then they come back onto the rod. This is from It's Oksana in Chicago. I just think that that's an awesome, awesome idea for these kinds of windows. Because expansive windows needs drama and authority. In some ways it can be pattern, in other it can be style. Doors. Talking about doors, you know, whether it's French or sliders, they're never equal segments, right? In the Midwest, we call these knocked out bays, and the builder puts in these wonderful little windows, and the trim goes to the soffit, and then he puts in a door. And the windows are at, you know, 82 or whatever, and the door's at 80, right? And so now I want a functioning door, and how do I make that function but unify everything together? So what we end up doing are putting these little fussy valances or nothing on them, or, you know, whatever might be. Here's the solution. Best $30 you're ever going to spend. It's essentially, it's called the Rolly door system. It's essentially you build a cornice with a sliding hinge on the back side so that the cornice opens up with the treatment and follows the line of the door. And they have a great tutorial online. Put that in your, toolbox, if you will. Here you can see the sliding hinge. Here's what it looks like with the doors closed. Essentially, there's a hinge here, and they break here. So this is one valance, second valance, and then it opens and slides. And you actually mounted it on a cornice. X-Door 10 is a great one to know whether you're doing shutters, roller shades, fabric shades. If you need to extend this out so you can put in your silhouette or your 2-inch wood blind, this guy has most every, he's a tool and die maker, most every extension for every type of door hardware. If he doesn't, you tell him the door hardware, he can make it for you. Short rods, again, so that it just, you know, frames your opening and your doors. One-way draws on sliders, one way to balance out that treatment, because, you know, you hate all that stack to one side and the rod is sort of going into infinity and there's nothing there, is doing a dead panel. So essentially you can do this as a functioning, or, you know, you don't, or you can do it as a stationary panel. But if you need to have a functioning treatment and you don't want to do just one panel, first thing you're going to want to have, make sure you have enough room to extend this bracket to bracket of your rod over onto either side of the wall for your stack back. And then you're going to order a one-way draw, and you're going to order one stationary panel. Okay, you're going to, and essentially the one-way draw butts into the leading edge of your dead panel. So when they're open, okay, it looks like a pair of draperies, but then you can close them and open them with a slider. One thing you want to keep in mind is you're going to have to figure stack back, and you're going to want to make sure that these stacks are essentially very close, because you don't want a 30-inch stack over here and a 10-inch, you know, one width over here stack. Stack backs are always important. Older clients, you need to have a tighter stack back, whatever the reason might be, and you're using a functioning Travis rod. This only works, by the way, with Travis rods. Don't need to do it with decorative rods. As you know, with a Travis rod, your space falls in front of the Travis rod, right, and hides the Travis rod. If you shorten up your finished length so that the drapery falls below the bottom of your Travis rod, and then the space and where you've cracked the buckram goes behind the treatment, your stack will be smaller or tighter. Remember, even your top stacks. Here's a laminated shade with a built-out crown, which is really nice over a door. Love this one with the color blocking. Here's another cornice idea, so the door opens and closes, and then you added some scale and dimension to it. This I thought was interesting with the door. It's one rod. So there's two panels, attached valance, and then there's a shear. So the shear draws open and closed, and then, you know, the drapery stationary panels there. So you've saved the client, you know, two mounting systems, right? Instead of you've put it all on one rod. Don't consider drapery cranes, or do consider drapery cranes, I should say, or maybe short rods. If you need to tie something back, use embraces versus just a tie back like this, because this you can undo. Transoms, last one. So that's that rectangular stationary window that's above everybody else, and you know the panel here is unifying. This is a stacked window essentially, because you have wall space, and it's kind of that one panel is unifying those two windows and that space between it. This is Marina Klima, design friend of Jackie's and mine, and this is beautiful treatment, isn't it, with the cascades? Again, stacked windows. It looks like she's got cassettes, vignettes at the top and at the bottom. Consider pockets for transoms, because, you know, here you've got this wonderful stained glass that you probably paid more money for, right? By the way, look at how not only does the swag into the stained glass distort the look, but I don't think they were mounted correctly, because I think that this one should have been in the center, and then these two smaller ones on either side, because they were trying to follow the architecture of the window. But see how odd that looks? So you've got this wonderful stained glass, and you know you've kind of like ruined it by the treatment, right? Where here you've brought the panels up, you've done balloons below, and then you're showing off the wonderful glass that's there. but you've given the height and the proportion that it needs for the room with the panel. Or this is Britt Carter from Lake Forest. I love it. Panels, pole swags, and then a cafe. Lifted swag. Can you tell I'm thinking I might want to be swags back? Screens again over a transom. These are quilted scrim, or not scrim anymore, but screens. Here's a lot of times we run into this, they do all the arches or the transoms and all the pretty windows, right, on either side of the fireplace so you can see it, and then they just do side windows. So what we had them do here is we had them do panel molding when they were doing the woodwork to raise the window height so that they were the same and give the illusion that there was a transom even though they didn't pay for the transom. They probably could have put the transom in by the time we were done with the woodworking, but no matter. Whatever, and then we did the treatments, so, and they also gave us the same sight line and all that other good stuff. Interesting old piece that has a valance underneath it. This is a Charles Fodra. Another interesting cornice for a transom. Here, the transom ends right about here, but they raised everything up to the ceiling, and then this mock shade really camouflages the fact that it's really a short, small window. Look at this sort of wrap from the cornice. So you had side panel here, and then in the interiors they wrapped it, so it kind of feels like it's a fabric, sheared fabric that's actually holding the cornice up, doesn't it? Here's a trick for you for transom windows. A lot of times you come in and the client has put in her hard treatments, right? And she's mounted them below the transom because we want to show our light. We've paid extra for the transom, right? But then you know that really when you're doing the soft treatment, you really need to come up above the window. But now I need to, how am I going to hide these white duets, right? And in this case it was in stain, and I wanted to come up here and do stationary panels above the window. So what we ordered is the upgrade, you can do it with Graber, Hunter, whoever you're using, the 4-inch valance for wood blinds. You can either match the stain or the paint or buy it unfinished and paint it, and then we just attached it with angle irons, because then when it was done, we came up, and then it looks, you can also use molding if you want, and trim molding or whatever, but the idea is to hide that stack. Angled windows, couple of ideas. How about that shade, right? Crazy. But this is oh my gosh, I hope she's not on the call today, and I'm forgetting her name. I just have a mental block. She is, oh my gosh, she's the medallion queen. She does amazing, amazing medallion work. But look at these angled windows, angled top Roman woven woods, and then these pleated stationary panels. And obviously they have angles cut to the top of the panel so that they hang straight. You have to do that. And there was a lot of work here thinking about how many medallions you're going to want to have, where you want to have them spaced, all those kinds of things. Another thing to throw in your toolbox from Rolly, should be advertising for Rolly today, is they make a grid tape, and it's by the inch. I believe maybe it's even by the ½ inch. You can literally, it's a released stick to it. You can put that up. You can, tell basically your installer can mount this sticky grid tape up, and you can tell them place those medallions, projections 4 inches apart, 3 inches apart, 2 inches. You just puts that tape up above the top trim and can mark where he needs to drill the holes versus coming down and over and all the guesswork and trial and error. This is just really simple in this angle window, right? They did shears, but I had to show you these. So these are rolled steeled cornices on this window, and it's really cool. Now it's probably a little bit noisy, I would think, being steel, but I just loved the idea of using an interesting material, for this room, and it really pulls the iron and the beams and everything together. How about this cornice up into this sort of tented ceiling? Wished it was a little longer, but I get it that it's doors. If it wasn't a door, it would have, you know, I don't know that I'd like to see all that underneath it. Side-by-sides. The one thing to remember about side-by-sides is when you have a side-by-side window, they're typically placed by the builder 7 to 10 inches apart. If you dress them separately, typically by the time you put your bracket up and your finial and everything, you have like just a couple of inches. And what happens is you have a break in the unity of the window treatment. It's not enough of a break to rest the eye, so it looks redundant and you lose rhythm when you do it. It creates a busier room like this or like this. You know, there's no reason that that couldn't have just been one horn to fill that space and then your eye would have moved around the space. But now all of a sudden it's like horn, swag, horn, swag, horn, horn. See, it breaks the rhythm. I know, love these before and afters, right? This is a great solution side by side is do a bed corona. Or one of these days I'm going to do this wall to wall iron. Ripple folds, wall to wall, kind of give you that ethereal look. And remember, when you're working with ripple folds, choose the fullness correctly. 100% fullness is minimum for residential. 80% is basically commercial. I typically use 120%. Match your snap tape to your hardware. Understand panel coverage. Make sure you choose the right kind of carrier. Use those charts and everything that you can get. Kirsch has a great brochure that should be on your desk. Put buckram in the top to help control the wave. Weight the hems is standard. And do your memory stitch to create so you don't have flaring. Some more side-by-side windows. Remember, treating a window separately uses more fabric, cha-ching, but I thought this was interesting. 2 shears, individual shears on the window, but 1 room darkening blind to come down. Make sure you unify, you do some sort of pleat, horn, jabot, whatever to break up the monotony and unify it. Alternate fabrics. This is in my dream journal too. Someday I'm going to be able to do this for a client. Or hide your TV behind it. How about this for a series of windows? That's wonderful drama, beautiful fabric, right? Or here, you know, what you have here is one continuous look, one rod, right? Filled in the space between the windows. And here, they didn't. They treated them separately. But punctuate it. You know, who says that you had to use the same fabric on all 3 windows? Choose something in the center to make it pop. So that's our what would you do with this window, take 10. Does anybody have any questions before I let you all go? Oops. Moving out the questions and hit the meeting. Would you explain a running stitch? A running stitch means that it literally does that. It's not tacked or looped through to catch it at the back. It's just one big running stitch. So you go in and out and in and out. And the pleat would move back and forth on the thread almost like a track. Yes, you can see the first half, Susie. Give me about 72 hours and then we always post everything on our website. So the whole recording will be on the website. Is that weight lined in interlined 1 pound? Oh, no. Okay, she said no. Pound is per yard for drapery weight is lined only. I usually figure 1.5 for blackout lining and 1.5 to 1 3/4 for lined and interlining. Oh, who's Rowley? Rowley is R-O-W-L-E-Y. If you don't know Rowley, you should get their catalog because they are the gold standard when it comes to any kind of window treatment, workroom, installation, and design stuff. They have all kinds of craziness. where do you get the memory stitch product, Lisa? If you're having it tacked on the bottom of your drapery panel, your workroom should be doing it for you. If you're looking for a no-sew system to try to make it work on the job site, Rolly again has it, and it's a bead chain and a tiny pin, and you catch the bead chain in the catch of the pin. I've used it in some cases when I've had to, but I prefer the sewn technique over the non-sewn technique. The other thing I want to mention about memory stitch and stationary panels is a lot of people use the stay-fold system. Keep in mind the stay-fold system is that plastic piece that has that sort of wave cut to it, and it has little pins, and you sit it down into the back side of your drapery for stationary panels only. The problem with that is, if you've ever used stay-fold before, it does not have the same number of folds that you typically get per width. I think there's only like 4 folds, and on a width of fabric you would have 5 folds. So then you've got to keep cutting them apart. It's just it's cumbersome, if you will. It's Oksana is in Chicago. I don't know who she had do the bent rods, but in Chicago, Leslie, if you're looking for somebody to do bent rods in Chicago, Brimar will. I would give them a very detailed template. To be very honest with you, I've had some issues with Brimar's bending, but Helzer Brothers in Arizona, Orion, LaFair Forge, any of them will bend tracks for you. And custom. Let me see. I'm going through my questions coming in here. I'll get rid of them. Okay. Rolly. The name of the extension guy, I'm sorry, I can't remember, Mary, what it is, but it's X-10 DOR, door, and you'll find him, you can contact him through his website. Our website address is softdesignlab.com, and click on the webinars, or click on Take 10 in the main menu, and all of our recordings are up there. Have I used ring locks for Roman shade? Do you like them? I'm not quite sure what you mean, Tina. Ring locks. And Leslie validates what I said, loves Helzer. And really, Anita, if you guys have anything specialty like outdoor stuff, or you need something bent or a funky bracket or what have you, they will make it for you. They're awesome. Maybe she's here, ring locks, I'm not sure what you mean by that. Narrow side lights by Front Door Solutions. One thing, depending on the style of the home, a lot of times they're in sort of, Victorian or traditional Georgian homes where they've got the side lights and the door on both sides. Obviously, rod pocket top and bottoms, right? But have you thought about Austrian shade, because you get that sort of swagging and a sheer? It's really pretty. I know people that have done, what about that scrim look that I was showing you on the arches? That would be really great. You could actually mount it top and bottom so it wouldn't swing with the door open. You don't necessarily have to have a rod pocket in the with a weighted hem in the bottom. But swags. Joan Willis has a pattern. It's a rod pocket. It's called a swag panel. And basically, it's a rod pocket panel that is cut with a camel hump in the center. So when you thread it onto the rod after it's fabricated, it swags like a swag. And I've done that on side panels. in traditional homes, or where there's a lot of architecture moldings around the house. It's really a beautiful look. You can do it in fabrics. So what is scrim? Well, scrim is actually a sheer fabric. It's kind of like a gauze, but when I'm referring to the scrim panels here, guys, I'm sorry, I'm going to come out of this and show you what I'm talking about with scrim. This is what I'm talking about when I say scrim. Oops, sorry, I thought I just did that. Hit the wrong slide. I talked about it early on, and I talked about it again with the arches. This is a scrim. So it's basically a flat sheer panel that gives you this sort of soft, ethereal look. It's a 1x2, and it's basically mounted on a 1x2 or stapled to a rod or whatever you want to do. Has a rod pocket at the bottom, and you put a weight bar in there, a flat weight bar, not a round brass weight bar, by the way, on the rod pocket. In this case, there's 2 black grosgrain ribbons on either side of banding. So it has no fullness, and it's a flat panel like a sliding track or a panel. Deb says she does the banded scrims on sidelight panels like this, but for the smaller windows, Susan, and her clients love it. Okay, I think that's good. Thank you guys all for coming, and again, give me 72 hours and I will post the recording online and you can look at it at your convenience. Thanks, everybody.